Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar on the gender gap, capitalism and the anti-feminist agenda. This is the first session in a series of webinars on the various aspects of the gender gap in neoliberal capitalism. My name is Barbara Steiner. I am the director of Transform Europe and I will be moderating today's session. Thanks to my colleagues, Anais Fley. She is facilitator Transform Europe for Strategies Against the Right, and she is coordinating this webinar series. And thanks to Angelina Giannopoulou, facilitators for the perspectives and strategies of the radical left and European integration, who set up the technical side of this meeting. But many thanks to our speakers today for being here, Gabriele Michalitsch and Marga Ferré. Gabriele Michalitsch is a political scientist, economist and professor at the University of Vienna. Marga Ferré is the president of the Transform Europe network. Very briefly, Transform Europe is the political foundation of the Party of the European Left and a network of 38 organizations in whole Europe. For the technical question, Anais will moderate the silent chat, do the silent moderate the chat. Please feel free to raise your hand with the raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom window if you want to ask questions or if you want to give comments. And but also feel free, of course, to comment in the chat. I can read it out or ask questions in the chat. We will have the two inputs first and then the room for your questions or comments. Well, the gender gap, we are familiar with the term in various contexts. It's the discrimination against women in terms of paid work, and it's the not just distribution of unpaid work, which is widely known. The other side is we observe a different voting behavior, more along gender lines. Women tend to vote more left-wing than men, and this can be observed in many countries. And Marga Ferré, who will take the floor after Gabriele Michalitsch, will go more into detail on this. Gabriele will now give a presentation with an initial introduction on how the ideological gender gap is shaped by the developments in neoliberal capitalism, by militarization and the anti-feminist attacks and the backlash also launched through the far right. I will give the floor now to Gabriele Michalitsch and I will share the screen for Gabriele's presentation. Do you see the presentation?
Yes.
Super. So Gabriele, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for your kind introduction and hello to everybody. Yeah, could you just put on the next slide, please? Barbara?
Do you see it already?
Yes.
The second slide?
No, it's already the first.
Okay, so something did not work out.
Yes, now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I want to briefly introduce what I'm going to talk about. I refer to the recent, or let's say the developments characterizing the last decades, and specifically neoliberalism, militarization, and anti-feminist attacks by the far right, which also includes somehow this so-called manosphere, all these new forms of internet organizations or loose organizations of anti-feminist groups like the incels or men's rights movements, and also partly these family activists. So let's start with neoliberalism. Next slide, please. I mean, I refer specifically to the German-speaking countries because that's where I know the situation best, but there are quite some differences, as you of course all know, in particular between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. There still is, or there still are quite some differences, which are obvious when taking a look at this map, for example, which refers to the gender pay gap, which is of course only one indicator and not certainly not a perfect indicator, but it's at least one. And there are huge differences if you take Austria, Germany, Latvia versus Luxembourg or Italy, interestingly, with regards to the gender pay gap. But still, what is characteristic for most countries, and the next slide, please, is the privatization which took place during the last decades, which made social conflicts to individual problems. So societal conflicts were reinterpreted as individual conflicts. So gender hierarchies were treated as and regarded as individual arrangements, redefined as individual arrangements to a growing extent. At the second main development in this neoliberal context, of course, and you all know about this, is the labor market deregulation that took place since at least the 1990s and resulted in integration of women in the labor force, but in most cases a marginalized form of integration, in particular meaning precarious employment for women, part-time jobs, and so on. And the trend, which was really very influential, and still is, of course, the most influential trend during the last years certainly was this enormous expansion of platform capitalism and this crowd work. So about 20-25% of European employees are crowd workers nowadays. And most of them are not even regarded as employees. And of course, many women too. So, and the third main strategy of neoliberal restructuring was social cuts, the cuts to the welfare state, which resulted in a feminization of poverty on the one hand, and due to the cutback of services, of public services, the increased unpaid work in the private sector, which also meant more informal employment, in particular with regards to cleaning, for example, because the households shift the unpaid work into the informal sector. So, and yeah, furthermore, it also, of course, resulted in social polarization also between women. So altogether, we have to take into account that neoliberalism meant lack of social security despite increasing integration into the labor force and personal dependence for women, in particular also related to the to the strengthening of this female tie to the reproductive sector, to the private household. Next slide, please. And these socioeconomic effects were accompanied by a discourse of choice and competition and autonomy and so on. And just to illustrate this, this is a job advertisement of an Austrian daily newspaper. It means the title of this advertisement means how strong is your will, and it's gender neutral. It refers to men and women. It was this binary idea at that time. It's from 2015, but you can see that the photo, which is part of this advertisement, at the first glance, you might think this is maybe a military scene. That was my first association. And it makes very clear that this subject model of neoliberalism, the competitor, the entrepreneur, and so on, that this is really a male model. And even if it's not declared as such, it's, this photo makes it very clear, in my opinion. So we have this model of competition and entrepreneurship, which stress aggression and assertiveness as necessary, as positive characteristics. And at the same time, there was, and of course still is, this neoliberal policy of reconciliation of work and family. So there was no talk about, or no debate about, the double burden of household and labor or employed work, but it was just, reconciliation, which at the same time was also meant, or at the same time also meant that the family became a key institution, not only for reproduction, but social cohesion, which was so much undermined by these neoliberal developments. So the family became much more a counterweight to social desolidarization and fragmentation in society. So this was more or less, let's say, the economic but also cultural side of the development. And next slide, please. With regards to the culture industry and in particular to the media, the general trend which can be observed is that there was quite some acceptance of feminist ideas and appropriation of feminist ideas, and these were mixed with anti-feminist elements. So in particular, there was this idea of empowerment, which was combined with increasing sexualization of female bodies. So it's, bringing together very basic contradictory ideas. It's the female active and desiring subject, But on the other hand, it's always, this female subject has to be surveyed and controlled, and particular by herself. Yeah, so it's a lot of self-surveillance and self-control combined with it. Of course, following norms given by the outside, in particular with regards to the body, once more. And there is this notion of self-determination, which at the same time was combined with, all these norms and standardization with regards to female behavior, to the female body, and so on. So feminism and anti-feminism were somehow mixed in the cultural production. And of course, within this general frame of individualism, this very neoliberal idea of the individual as a autonomous, but lonely, let's say, fighter against all the other lonely fighters. So the collective, the social, and the political became less and less important in contrast to this individualism. So just to illustrate this, the next slide, please. So this is just one example of how this turned out. So finally, even Wonder Woman has to be saved by Superman. So there is this notion of a strong woman who is free to choose and so on. But finally, at the very end, she depends on male protection. It's very much in popular culture still. Next slide, please. So what happened was, also in different forms, also for economic reasons, an appropriation and commodification of gender differences and of feminism, which also resulted in intensified stereotyping of gender. For example, all this gender marketing, which was practically invented just maybe 10 or at most 15 years ago, and was not common when I was a child, for example. Next slide, please. So just to give you an example, I mean, feminism has become somehow a slogan, a T-shirt you buy, something you demonstrate, but it's hollowed out. It doesn't mean anything any longer. It's not political. It's a matter of consumption. And that's just one example. And the next slide, please. And this is how, I mean, of course, with regards to toys, there always have been quite some differences, but that all these pinkifications of toys, for example, all that this increased enormously during the last years. And it's not only reduced to toys, but for example, hair shampoos, things like this, computer bags, skateboards, sports articles, and so on and so on. So there is a specific construction of gender stereotypes, which is really done via the commodities that are produced, and which also transport some sort of naturalization of gender since 2 decades roundabout. So these are, let's say, the main neoliberal developments. Next slide, please. And one more, in particular, during the last few years, very important development we have to observe is militarization. And militarization, of course, means also promoting a militarized form of masculinity, a quite different form of masculinity, different from, this manager's masculinity or similar neoliberal types. Militarized masculinity is stressing this toughness of the neoliberal market fighter even more. It's more based on physical strength. I mean, although weapons are more or less technical advices nowadays. And it's a soldierly form of masculinity. It's always very closely related to violence. So violence is made much more acceptable again. And we also know that militarization and related to violence means more violence against women as an immediate link and as an immediate outcome. And related to this is, of course, this very traditional notion of protecting women and children. Next slide, please. I just want to show you an example of an advertisement of the Austrian military, which is tiny in comparison to other countries, in particular because Austria is a neutral, I mean, at least formally neutral country. And these sorts of advertisements are all over Vienna right now. There are different subjects, but this is one of them. And as you can see, women are integrated in this militaristic vision to some extent, but of course this does not really change this specific notion of the male military. Yeah, so neoliberalism, militarization, and finally the far right attacks on feminism. And of course, there is quite some, there is a rather broad spectrum. I just want to mention the key points in my opinion. So basically, there is this far right turn against feminism. Existing gender hierarchies are denounced as mere ideology, so they are just negated. And as a result, gender equality policies are rejected. In how far they still exist, because this is it's not really about gender equality that much any longer, since quite some time. And existing patriarchal subordination is negated. So quite the opposite is actually proposed. It's not women who are oppressed because feminism has achieved all its goals. It's men that are oppressed now, men and boys. So men and boys are the victims of feminism. I think this is a very common topic and one of the key topics of the far right. So they affirm that there is some sort of a crisis of masculinity, and in particular of white masculinity. So what is really constructed by the far right, next slide please, is a new form of hegemonic masculinity, which is white, male, strong men, confident of themselves, heroic and soldierly, ready to protect women and to fend off migrants, and finally also ready to defend the nation. So this converges quite a lot with, you know, all these trends of militarization I've just mentioned before. So I think militarization is to some extent really an integration of far-right ideas in the mainstream. So besides this, or this, not besides this, but based on this, or closely related to this masculinist identity politics, of course, is the idea that there are only two genders, that there is a natural binary gender order, and there is a natural heterosexual desire, which of course is also connected to enormous hostility to trans people. And natural binary gender order, of course, implies a natural male superiority. And that's what's more or less explicitly mentioned by many politicians of the far right. I want to give you just one example from the die Alternative für Deutschland, so Alternative for Germany, Bernd Höcke, who is one of the leaders of one of the federal states, AfD party. He has published a book with containing interviews of his, and he's talking about the stunted male self-confidence. So these, you know, all the men who are victims of feminism. And his diagnosis is 80% of men are wimps and 10% are cramped machos. And there is only 10% who are, let's say, real men in his view. And he also, for example, states that we, referring to the society, to the German society, we must be careful, and quote, that politics does not deform the inner nature of the sexes by depriving women and men of that peculiar grace on which mutual attraction and respect are based. I mean, it's just one example. There are thousands. And he also, for example, expresses his support for the military service because he thinks that it's a wonderful opportunity for young men to develop their personality and to develop personally. So it's certainly not all the parties of the extreme right argue that explicitly with regards to you know, women's subordination, but certainly it's one of the key elements of all far right parties. So next slide, please. What's related to this is, in case the nation is ethnically conceived, and this is the case for the AfD, the nation is constructed as a threatened nation. I mean, that's also what Trump does, threatened by foreign infiltration, but also by the lack of own children, of so-called racially poor children, with regards to Germany or even to the US. So having children is one of the crucial socio-political issues for the far right. And this is the basis for population policy and the control of female sexuality. And that's why we had all these, or let's say it's one of the main reasons why there is this backlash against abortion in particular. So to come to the end, based on this overview of developments which were so dominant during the last decade, the neoliberal restructuring, the militarization, which is one of the key goals of the European Union now. And of course, this rise of the far right and their political program with gender issues at the core. It's not really surprising that there is an ideological gender gap manifest in elections. It's in my opinion, a very rational response of women to the far right and all these developments. It's probably a much more emotional response on the part of men. And it's at the same time completely in accordance with male and female ascriptions. And it also reflects daily experiences, gender-specific daily experiences. So the ideological gender gap is not really surprising, I think. Thank you.
Many thanks, Gabriele, for this presentation and your input. I would end this also perfect bridge to Marga's input. I would like to give the floor directly to Marga Ferré, please.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank you, Gabriele, for this excellent analysis of the far-right reaction against women's. I like your last sentence, which is this gender gap we are analyzing in political behavior between men and women is a rational response to the situation. I would like to make it a little much more complex. And in my speech today, what I want to share with you is that there is few phenomena that are as well documented as the fact that the women have been moving their vote to the left rather than men in the last decades. But what we are facing now is another step in which we see that the political behavior of the young women between 18 years old and 29 years old has widened this gap immensely. We need to analyze it and understand why, and also to understand the consequences of that. So what I would like to share with you, the hypothesis is this is a global phenomenon. It's happening all around the world. And this means things. It's not a particular question of the Western world or Europe, is all around the world. And secondly, this gender gap is also a generational one that we need to go deep into that. And it's happening, let me insist, everywhere. And to my surprise, there is no analysis or there is some kind of blindness in the social academia, even in the left, that they take note of what is happening, but do not go deep into why young women are becoming more and more radical leftists all around the world. It's like, okay, this is happening, but they don't go into that. So there is a few studies analyzing why this is happening, and I hope this webinar encourage all of us to go deep into this question, because in my view is absolutely relevant. So let me see if I'm able to share with you my screen, which is not always easy. Yeah, here it is, I think. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not sure what are you watching, but anyway. In the studies of the gender gap, I mean, the difference between men and women in voting, the first study, which is a mythical one, who started analyzing this question was this one of Ronald Inglehart and Pippa Norris. It's a mythical study of the 20s in Canada, who analyzed very seriously the political behavior between men and women in Europe, is in this case you are watching, since the 70s to today. So there you can see something that in socio-political analysis is very well known, is that the women who were born during the 50s were more conservatives, and these things changed it, as you can see, with the women who were born in the 70s. This is obviously because of the immense incorporation of women to the labor market that make women's economically independent. And therefore, as Gabriele said before, there is a logic behind the idea that the women tends to vote for the political parties who attends are more open for the caring. I mean, meaning public education, kindergartens, health, and the caring of the elders, and normally are social democrats and leftist parties. So there is some kind of, because of the question of that the women's are on, we are in our shoulders, the caring question. This is one of the explanation of what is happening, but it's not enough. As you can see, this study, which is, I insist, a very famous one, finished in the 20s, at the beginning of the century, where the gender gap were reversed and were starting to be clear difference between men and women in Europe in the tendency of what they are voting. But since 2000, we are watching that this difference is growing immensely, but not only in Europe. So let me show you this one. It's in Spanish, sorry, but I can translate you. This is a study very well done about the gender difference in facing the far right proposals. So, and it's worldwide. That's the reason, because I found it very interesting. So you can see in different countries, it's in Spanish, but you can understand the countries, now Bulgaria, Croatia, Hungary, but United Kingdom, Ireland, Germany, Spain. All of this is Europeans, but same happen in others. You can see that there is a gender tendency towards the far right, and we can find the same to go with the far left or the radical left. That is a clear analysis that is a global phenomenon, is what I'm trying to insist. It is happening everywhere. We need to analyze it in a point of view that is higher than the national perspective, or even a European one, because it's the way how, in my perspective, capitalism and neoliberalism and the far right globally are attacking women's rights, or they are a reaction to the feminism, which was, by the way, that is my hypothesis, a global tendency also. It's so much global that it's happened not only in the Western countries, but it's happened also in China. This is a study made in China. Of course, in China, the way they divide the history is different, as you can see, no? And you can see that the female in the post-reform generation, I mean, after Deng Xiaoping opening in the 70s, the economy, now the tendencies of the people towards the question of the state taking care of health, I mean, the progressive policies, no, which is equality or non-discrimination, of course, equal pay for men and women, on the question of public services are much more supported by women than men, even in China today. It's an absolutely global phenomenon. Okay, so for go very speed, we got since the beginning of the century a gender gap, generally speaking, between men and women globally, in the sense that I fully agree based on what Gabriele said before, how neoliberalism had developed the inequalities and at the same time the privatization of the public sector, and on the other side, the individualization of the social and labor relationships. And this is a very male perspective in order to keep the dominance against women, and also the idea of the sexual division of labor, meaning that the reproduction necessities are on the shoulders of women. Okay, but what we are facing now is something completely new and absolutely, in my view, astonishing. Look, in 2023, in February, this study was launched and is menacing to becoming the most famous study in social history. I mean, this study was published by the Financial Times in February 2023, and was a study who Financial Times asked to Gallup, the American survey company. And it's a study about the political behavior of men and women, young men and young women in 4 different countries, in South Korea, in the US, in Germany, and in the United Kingdom. And what we discovered through this study is that the gender gap is growing immensely since, as you can see, 2015 onwards, basically 2015, to say, to the midst of the 10th of this century. In the case of South Korea, it's dramatically big because of the particular question in South Korea, because it's the militarization, as Gabriele said. South Korea is one of the most militarized countries in the world because of the situation with North Korea. The military service for men is 2 years. I mean, it's really huge. And that is one of the reasons of this resentment of the young men against women based on gender. But the question is that we can see the same in the US, in Germany, or in the UK. What we see is that the young women are becoming much more leftist, while the men, some of them, not in the same proportion, by the way, are becoming more right-wingers. This study blew up the mind of the whole academia all around the world who was studying the far right, because the anti-feminist agenda of the far right was not analyzed as relevant as it is in terms of the political behavior of the population, and trying to understand the far right in other aspects, like the anti-migration policy, which of course is relevant, or the narrative, different narrative nationalism or racism, which is very relevant. But for the voters, for the people who vote for the far right, particularly the young men, anti-feminist is the main reason. And we got the studies, I got one in Argentina and another one in Spain, who shows when you ask the voters of the far right why they vote for the far right, anti-feminists become one of the most relevant issues for them. And opposite to that, I assume, because there is no studies, that the reason why young women vote more for the radical left is precisely the same one. But we don't have studies because it's like a blindness about this. The studies only are focused in why the young men vote for the far right, but not why the young women are becoming more leftist. And I think in Transform Europe, we can encourage you, all of you, to think about it because it's pretty relevant for the left. As much as we can see in the last elections in Germany, that it was amazing. I mean, the 35% of young women in Germany voted for Die Linke. 35% of the young women below 24 years old voted for Die Linke. It's impressive, literally impressive. And it was so astonished, and that made that the 25% of the young people in Germany voted for the Die Linke, which is great. But among them, there is a gender gap. Only 15% of the young men, which is a lot, voted for Die Linke, but 35% of the young women voted for Die Linke. It's impressive. But even though when we talk in transfer with our comrades from Die Linke and Rosa Luxemburg, they accept the fact, but don't not analyze or go deep into why this is happening. And I think this is our task in the future, because based on this and other slides I'm going to share with you, young women are becoming the political subject who are sustaining the left more clearly, particularly in some countries. So we need to understand why it's happening, more than understand why young men are voting more for the far right. At least that is the point of view I'm going to propose to you to do. This is, sorry, there is no colors because I did it, and I'm not a specialist in doing that. It's a Spanish case, it's the same one. It's the elections in 2023. As you can see, the two last columns are Bildu, which is a radical left political party in the Basque countries. When you see that almost the 80% of the young voters were women. 80% of the young people in the Basque country voted for the radical left. And only the 12% of the young men. It's impressive. I mean, something must happen there for having that. Sumar is the coalition of the left, and there is also a very relevant gender gap in the young voters below 24 years old, when you can see that almost 60% of the young people voted for the left, and comparing to the 40% of young men, which is a lot, but there is even a big difference. I would like to put your attention in Vox. Vox is the first column, is the far right, and you can see also the gender gap opposite. What you can see that with people below 24 years old, you can see that more than the 70% who voted for Vox were men, and only the 23% of young women voted for Vox. For me, this is absolutely relevant. I cannot understand why do not go more deep in why this is happening, because these people who politicize themselves very young can't continue this tendency in the future, or at least there is some reason for this to happen that we clearly need to analyze. In my last slide, before going to the debate, just another study who showed literally the same in different countries, from Australia to Germany and on South Korea. You can see that the light blue are the male who are more, the scale up is from 0 to 10, radical left and radical right, are more tendency to go to the right, and the women's are more tendency, particularly in Germany, you see the last one, are more close to the radical left. So I have like dozens or more studies saying literally the same. I remember Barbara and I, we went to Finland, and our friends from Left Alliance told us that the 70% of the voters of Left Alliance in Finland were women. 70%. I mean, for me, it's amazing why they don't go deep into what this is happening. 70% of the voters of Left Alliance in Finland, when a beautiful 70% of the votes in the European elections, were women. And only 30% were men. So this, I assume also, because we don't have a study that is based in young women, massive support for the Left Alliance in Finland, but we don't have the study, it's an assumption. I'm just saying. Of course, it's different in different countries. In France, it's not so obvious, but literally exists. There is a lack of studies of the young women votes there, but we have difference in elections, no? Because, for instance, in presidential elections, it's much more difficult to see this gender gap because you choose between two options only. But when the options is more clear, and there is possibilities of voting for the radical left, this is happening. So we cannot compare with Marine Le Pen versus Macron or the question of Giorgia Meloni, but in countries where the elections are pluralistic, this is happening. Or even if the young women don't vote, the attitude is there, and it's a global one. So let me insist in this idea. What we are facing is so much relevant, in my view, that the few people who is studying this around the world, more and more every day, are going to the conclusion that we are facing a tectonic generational change with long-term consequences. Let me repeat it. A tectonic generational change with long-term consequences is the result of an analysis of a brilliant teacher in Spain, Eva Anduiza, who make a study on the vote for the Vox. No? And we are friends and we talk about it a lot, and we are really astonished at what is happening. It's so new also the phenomenon that we need to go to understand why it's happening. In Argentina, the studies after the far right winning the elections is dramatically the same. I mean, the 70% of the young women don't vote for the far right. It's like the young women are becoming like the wall who stopped the far right, or not allowing them to be so big as they are. In Argentina, there are some sociologists who are start saying that gender and age is becoming a relevant predictor of political behavior more than socioeconomic status. I mean, for the next elections, and I think for the left, it's very relevant to understand this, because it means something, and means also that we need to open a new conversation about what is happening in society based on what Gabriele is saying. I mean, it's not a question of being a woman and men, it's how the system and how the far right is attacking the feminist agenda. So let me go in the last minute in my particularly Marga analysis on why this is happening, because let me insist that there is like academic blindness. Okay, there is a gender blindness in academia in everything. I mean, they don't put feminism or women at all as a relevant issue. But in this question of analyzing the gender gap, I found nonsenses, ridiculous things like women are more moderate than men, women do not have contact with migrants as much as men, that's the reason they don't vote for the far right. I mean, idiotic things made by the Stanford University. I mean, or I don't want to give it to you, but I have a list of supposedly serious studies on how women are mediators. I mean, ridiculous things who deny an obvious reality, because when a phenomenon happens, globally speaking, and so big as young women and men political attitude, the answer has to be obvious and not something secret. So let me come back to all the data who shows that the gender gap grows a lot since 2014, 2015. So what happened in 2014, 2015 to open the gap between the political attitude being men or women? What happened was the fourth wave of feminism. That is what happened. When the Me Too appears, globally speaking, was of course a consequence of a long-term feminist struggle, who was worldwide, having different characteristics from the different waves of the feminism before. And for me, it's absolutely obvious that this is one of the reasons why. This fourth wave of feminism become worldwide, by the way, because the communication system make easy to understand that what was happening in Argentina fighting for abortion, or what happening in India in the biggest demonstration in Indian history against the rape of a young woman, was shared particularly by young women in an instant and in the same moment. It was a fourth wave of feminism who put the violence and abuse against women at the center. And I don't have data, but intuition that the young women now consider violence, any violence against women, as something absolutely unacceptable. Something that my generation considered acceptable. But for the young woman, it's literally non-acceptable. And they came, how to say it, growing and becoming teenagers under the umbrella of the fourth wave of feminism, make for them absolutely unacceptable any kinds of violence against women, or at least they have more tools to fight against the abuse and the violence against women. But also the battle for equality between men and women, who are the constants of the feminist movement. I have the sensation that for the young women is not enough. They fight for the idea of equality for granted. I mean, that has to be happened for them. And there's more than that. There's one study, only one, which I found trying to understand what is happening. It was a study made by localities carried out by 2014 and 2023. So in the period where the fourth wave of feminism was wetting the whole world, for saying that, that reveals that in social attitude, the youngest women have incorporated anti-patriarchal values as natural values for young women. When I was young, it was not natural at all to be a feminist. For young women, it's a natural question, incorporating these anti-patriarchal values, who goes beyond the idea of the traditional attack against women, the idea of the traditional question of the women must to be at home and the man has to be the only one who take care and earn money. No, they are also against the new sexism, who denies, as Gabriele said clearly, the idea that there is no inequality between young and men, which is the narrative of the far right. So I assume these women do not accept this easily at all. But let me say that there is no studies on that. I'm finishing saying that how much relevant this is, particularly for the left, because if this political behavior, this gender gap between men and women has to be studied, because I have the sensation, and let me finish with this, that in this moment of history, analyzing it this for months, the political subject of change in society today looks more like a young precarious woman rather than other political subjects in society. And this is really relevant for the left. At least is the hypothesis I would like to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marga, for your presentation and your input. Many thanks. The floor is open now for questions. Whoever wants to give a comment or a question, please either put it in the chat or use the raise hand function. I have no requests for the floor yet. So I would directly, I would like to ask Gabriele if she wants to reply on Marga's presentation.
Oh, yeah, well, basically, I absolutely agree with Marga, but I think that it was not only Me Too. I mean, there were several really important things in 2015, and I was thinking in particular of climate change, because, I think it was in 2015 that the Paris Climate Agreement was agreed upon, and that the awareness concerning climate change has increased tremendously, because we know about climate change since decades, but it's I think during the last 10 years there is really public awareness about this, and I think this is, from a care perspective, I mean, from a very traditional perspective on gender, it's caring about our children and caring about our future as human beings and so on. I think that this is quite influential too.
Thank you, Gabriele, for this note. I would have a question to both of you. You, Gabriele, mentioned the so to say, the incorporation of feminism to our consumerism, that feminism is emptied out. You, Marga, mentioned that feminist or anti-patriarchal values became, so to say, part of our ground set of young women's values. How do these two go together in so far? Or how could we use maybe the normalization of feminism also in the consumer sphere, or how could we reverse this emptying out? And I'm sorry that the Zoom does strange things. I'm trying to stop this. view of more speakers. I don't know, maybe.
I don't know if it is because I live in Spain, which is the feminist movement became a natural thing. I mean, it's, in other countries, maybe it's not the same. But it's the same what you see a Che Guevara t-shirt, you know, or this intent of capitalism to adapt all the cultural tendencies into a commodity. Of course, but that does not diminish at all the meaning of what feminism or what Che Guevara was at all. It's just only an attempt of capitalism to mercantilize everything. And it is true that shows the normalization of the concept. I mean, I'm against it, but at the same time, it's the normalization of the concept. When I was young, to be a feminist was not a good thing. Even women who were feminists didn't say openly that they were, because it was a bad word. Now it's a normal word. But let me come back to the idea that Gabriele said, and I fully agree on that. The question is 2015, 2014. Of course, the Me Too, let me say, was only a consequence, and it was relevant because it was in the United States. But of course, there's a lot of things that happened at the same time. Look, there was a book written in the 90s under the title of Reaction, written by a feminist, Silvia Faludi, who analyzes in the 90s how the conservative parties or conservative narratives in the US attack the achievements of the feminist movement in terms of equality at the time. And in that book, there's a sentence I like, which is saying that there's a reaction against feminist advances that happen not because we achieve equality, it's because we can do it. Or in the moment that the possibility of change is happening, they react before. This is one of the hypotheses studying the far right rising in the world at the same time. The moment the historians are putting the rise of the far right is the first time Donald Trump won the elections in 2017. Was a little before, but that was like the big explosion of the far right as a political menace in the same time. There is a lot of analysis who said, and I agree, that the far right has a reaction against the climate change movement, who was in a moment close to making natural and normal demands for political change in terms of climate, and the reaction against also China, of course, and the question of the decolonization theory, and the question of the feminist demands for equality. So these three concepts, the idea of China changing the international order, the feminist pushing for equal rights, and the question, of course, anti-racism at the same time. I'm meant to remember you that the Black Lives Matters was also a consequence of the decolonization theory who was developed in the Global South for years that exploded also almost at the same time. And the far-right reaction against it is this aggressivity that Gabriele put on the table, which was at the same time the question of being racist, of being absolutely patriarchal, and military and war also as a part of the same reaction. But I would like to think that the possibility of change is there, and the young women are carrying on themselves this beautiful idea to stop the far right and to create the possibilities of re-engaging with the left policies again. So for me, it's a good news, and that's the reason because I would like to study more.
Many thanks, Marga. Heidi, I saw your hand raised, but Gabriele, do you want to reply also to Marga?
No, not really. I mean, I agree with her, yeah.
Okay, Heidi Meinzold, please. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for both, especially the Marga, your description of this growing gap, and my question is, and this is especially also from a background of a women's peace organization, we see as a reaction of this growing gap of course, a lot of aggression and reducing space and rights for women and women in a broad sense. On the other side, it should somehow be the aim to pacify a little bit the public debate on it, and we discuss more and more, especially with our young women, the way of bringing more men, young men especially, in dialogue, even on the organizational level, in dialogue with the young feminists. This is for some of my generation, it's a difficulty because it's a kind of, for me, it's nearly a kind of protected space that we are risking to lose. On the other side, I see these enormous chances of integrating this feminist analysis also from a man's perspective into also electoral perspectives for the left somehow. So this is, for me, it's actually, yeah, I'm still in a way of thinking, and we are discussing this a lot now, more and more, especially with the young generation. So perhaps it's not the right question to you, Marga, but to young people. But we are all a bit in this. If we want to go back from militarism and this patriarchal paradigms that you described also, Gabriele, yeah, how to do it.
Many thanks, Heidi. Marga, you want to reply directly?
Just a little, because as I said, this is a new phenomenon that there is not enough studied. What has been studied the most were the men attitudes, not the women, particularly young men, because of this gender tendency of analyzing only men or the male attitude as a problem, but not understanding that the women reaction is a positive one. In the analysis of why some young men are becoming more reactionary ones, clearly affected what Gabriele said before. So Gabriele said this question of militarization, this question of the sexualization of the these messages are addressed to them, particularly through social media, because they are an objective of the radicalization of the young men under this attitude. But the best study I have, I will send it to you. This is a study made by some people from Denmark, and an international group who studied the reaction of the young men in South Korea during the COVID, and go to the manosphere, the place in the internet where the young men talk about terrible things against women, and analyzed it very seriously. They discovered something that now is a common language to understand, that the young men are the victims of the resentment is in English? The victimization of the young men. This is the narrative, and this is the messages they are saying to them all the time. It does not mean that the young men who vote for the far right are more machist than my father. On the contrary, I mean, some of these men who react against feminism, they accept LGBTQ rights. They are not against the equal pay, men and women. They feel that they are the victims. Of course, they are not, but this is a complete construction of narrative against them based on the idea of the resentment, on the idea of a new kind of masculinity that Gabriele said, not the idea that only they are in a disadvantage in this society, which is absolutely crazy, but it's happening. So I don't have the answer, but Heidi, I'm so tired, but this is my personal view of talking only about young men, but I prefer to talk about young women. Because first, I think it's more positive. Secondly, I think they are answering very bravely in a situation that they are against attack. And because I found them the positivity of the future, particularly in Europe, of the defeat of the far right. So basically, we need to see in the next 10 years as a scientist, how this develops, because maybe it's a punctual thing, or maybe it's going to change a little, but watching the war-mongering narrative of the European Union on the rearm and the militarization, I don't expect that. I don't expect that. My proposal also, Heidi, for you is particularly what you have said, that putting pacifism, climate change, feminism, our working class together and fighting for this same right. But this is clearly what Gabriele underlined, which is that we need critical theory from the feminists on the capitalism today. And this needs new tools to understand the reaction and the political behavior of this society, because obviously this political behavior, the gender gap, is a consequence. It's not happened out of the blue. There are material reasons for that. Gabriele explained some of them, but not all of them. I mean, we need to go deep into that. I don't have the answer, but clearly it's not as easy as putting together a young man and you want to talk to each other. I mean, it's not as simple as that. But I honestly think that we need to encourage and empower young women, because I literally found that there is the place to stop the far right and to grow a better future in Europe. Honestly, thinks that. Honestly, yeah. I would like to see what Anais thinks about this.
Thank you. No, I've been totally into both of your inputs. There is a remark in the chat, but maybe Babs, you can read it afterwards. I was very, very interested in both of your inputs and had a lot to reflect on the hypothesis, which is not really an hypothesis, which is a remark, the fact that there is a correlation between the moments where the contradiction between men and women deepened and Me Too, which is only an observation, and it's pretty obvious when you think of it, but actually to think, like to put words on the fact that one of the driving forces of the reactionary international is actually the strength and the power of the feminist movement, is something like you have to put words on this, because it's something you can just observe, but when you put words on this, it brings a lot to think on. I have questions, but I think our main problem here is we have a lot of hypotheses and we have a lot of questions, but we are lacking of studies. And so I think it's important to keep bringing in the discussion hypotheses and questions, but also to think, okay, how could we have more concrete studies to step on, and who could we possibly talk to see if there is studies that can be possibly run. I don't know. But the one question that I've been preoccupied with for a few months now is that my hypothesis and one of my observations is that between some family structures and religious structures of society and others, you can see also differences in how being a woman brings you to the left and to the radical left. And this is only an observation I made. And I already talked about it with some of you. But I feel like, and what I observe is that in the Protestant countries, and I don't know about Orthodox, I mean, but in Christian countries, the Protestant ones have some material conditions that bring women more to the left than in Catholic countries. So, for example, in I don't know, it's an observation. So in France, for example, being a woman brings you less to the left than in other countries like Germany, UK, US. And I don't know about, for example, in Italy or in Spain. Maybe it's also because what you mentioned before, we can't compare because the Macron-Le Pen situation is a particular situation, the Melanie situation is a particular situation. But I think it would be interesting to have to reflect also on the importance of family structures in the first family structures, and also in the history of the worker movement, and how women have been involved in the workers' movement in each countries, with like how it affects how deep is the gender gap in each country, in each situation, because not only because it's like we can find it interesting or not, but maybe it can be it can help us to understand how we can first make being a woman, like, so I'm sorry, my English is quite broken, but how we can make the fact that being a woman brings you to the left more important, like yeah, making the feminine condition more for the left to use it more. I don't know how to put it in words, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I think we should really see if there are studies on that, and to see if something can be we can bring something out of it. But
Thank you,
it's
Anna.
only questions. Sorry.
Thank you, Anais, for your questions. They refer not only to the religious backgrounds in the countries, but also to left-wing strategy in general. And I would like to read out another comment of Andrea Peniche in going in the direction of left-wing strategy. And I see also Jolanta Bielskine raised her hand. So Andrea writes, it's been very stimulating. I wanted to comment on some of what Marga said about the being left-wing of young women. Finally, someone decided to ask the right question. Why? If feminism is being used as a tool for young women's response and resistance, what worries me is that the far right has already realized this and is acting accordingly, but the left has not. Feminism has been under attack for many years, and the left, in my opinion, and making an abusive generalization, is not realizing the rupture in the movement and is not knowing how to refound a left-wing feminism. So an example for the rupture, the UK anti-trans case is evidence of this. Feminism is increasingly captured by neoliberalism, as Gabriele explained, and we continue to navigate in murky waters. I'm not being pessimistic, on the contrary. I feel a huge urgency to separate the waters because there is also a lot of conservatism with roots and derivations in feminism. So maybe we have the reaction from our speakers now, and then afterwards I take Jolanta's question or comment, if you agree. Gabriele?
Yes, actually, I think the key point is, what does feminism mean nowadays? I mean, what do people understand by feminism? And I mean, I was just thinking about, this so-called feminist foreign policy proposed by Annalena Baerbock, and it was just, to its core anti-feminist, in my opinion. And there are many similar cases. So I don't know what this, is this really linked to feminism? In what way? Yeah, I really think feminism has been hollowed out so much as far as this anti-capitalist and transforming character is concerned. I mean, transforming society. I can't see this in all these cultural articulations. Yeah, that's one point. And maybe with regards to young men, I think there is a real need to promote a different, an alternative form of masculinity. I think that's something that the left parties altogether could do much more, to make clear, I mean, to make it explicit and to show there is also, a progressive form of masculinity, just to counter these attacks and these militarization tendencies and so on. And yeah, and that there are, I mean, even if these socioeconomic factors are not articulated that clearly in different studies, I think that they are very important, because this social insecurity, this enormous insecurity with regards to employment, to employment and unemployment. I mean, the climate crisis, it really creates a very, very deep feeling of insecurity, which has to be addressed, in my opinion, and which may be because of still, of course, dominant gender roles. It affects men more than women, maybe, I don't know, but maybe.
Many thanks, Marga.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Andrea. I think it was brilliant what you said. Absolutely brilliant. We need to analyze much better, but what is at least clear for me is that, how to say it, when you have this data so obvious, particularly in the left, I found it a responsibly denial of what is happening in some part of the leaders of the left. And that means that maybe we need to revisit that. So my insistence all the time is that we need the voices of the young women to be heard more and carry out the anti-patriarchal values for them are natural and clearly not for some part of, even in my party, I'm not criticizing others, that is happening. The question of feminism, I mean, I think we need to distinguish the feminist theory and the different feminist tendencies inside the feminist theory, in this sense, and political practice, that the feminism as a wave, I mean, the values incorporated, particularly by the young woman who understands equality as a normal thing, something that they don't want to dispute, debate even about it. For young women, abuse, being touched without permission, the question of the consensus is something natural that for us was not at all. And I found it very brave. Even the question that is very uncomfortable for men to understand that the very young women question themselves sexuality more clearly than my generation. And this is also a question of the patriarchal roles. And we need to go deep into that. Only two questions more that maybe, Gabriele, also you are interested in. This gender blindness in analyzing society also is in the left. Today, I made analysis in Spain. Women's is the majority of the working class, paid. The majority, 52% of the workers under labor conditions are women, plus 17% of migrants in my country. So the working class today is by far composed by women and migrants. And we need to analyze this clearly to have a political discourse according to that. I would like to see more in other countries. Yesterday, I had the wonderful news of my trade union that they make their gender analysis and they discovered that the 48% of the members of my union are women. And this is the first time in history that there was a, when I was young, when I joined the union, there was only 25% of women and 75% of men. And now this also making equal, and I would like to know that in the studies if this is happening in other countries or in other parts of the world. And my last remark, that maybe Andrea will also need to go into that, is the question of how the young people politicize themselves. And one of the vectors maybe that could explain this is that there's more women than men in universities. And this is a global tendency too. And I don't know if it's a determinant factor, but clearly it has to be one of them. And it's a tendency. I would like to see more if the participation of women in university is increasing, and if this have a relation or not with this question of the being politicized in an open space like a university rather than another. So I don't know. It's just only put it into that. It was mentioned by Angelina, who is a young woman who said that happened in Greece, that happened in Spain. And that happened, or particularly in some faculties where the political debate is much more open. I don't know, we need to go into that also to understand much better the phenomenon. And thank you for your remarks.
Thank you, Marga. Jolanta, the floor is yours.
Hi. I don't know if my intervention will be relevant, but it's just I want to share, because these issues are very important to us as well, you know, for feminists in Lithuania. But we have other struggles as well within this kind of, because we can see the attacks from the far right, right? We can see the attacks from militarization, which in Lithuania at the moment is especially a hot topic. And far right being anti-feminist for years, all of a sudden became talk about equality of women, you know, to go to the army and all that. But these are kind of attacks that we can visibly see easy to recognize. But what we notice inside the left is that because men on the left, a lot of them being progressive, they consider themselves being feminists as well. And for example, we have in Kartu, we have this feminism committee, left feminist committee, that we don't allow men. We just want to have this safe space for women, you know, and we notice that women are much, feel much better if they can talk among themselves. And all of a sudden, this being kind of attacked by men saying, okay, but we are feminists as well, so you discriminate us as feminists of not being able to participate. Not only that, when we started to become more open, you know, still have some kind of closed circle committee, but bring out our issues as a policy suggestions, you know, to the General Assembly of the left. And then immediately men become very proactive on issues like, for example, legalizing prostitution. And then we feel like we are in minority, and me being called conservatives, you know, like female feminists, because we say like, we don't agree with the term sex work and things like that. And all of a sudden we're being criticized for being moralizers, conservatives, and all that. And so this is like a big issue at the moment. And even if like as female feminists, we said, okay, leave it to us. We take into consideration what you said, your arguments, and we in our circle will think further. no, they wouldn't leave that. They would just say, no, you have to kind of, because it's important for men, and no matter what we say about patriarchy and all these things. But I want to thank Gabriele. You're still here.
Yes,
because
of course.
In your slides you have this empowerment versus sexualization, and I just want to thank you for this, because it kind of gave me another tool which to put things into places as well. Because talking about sex work, even though it's important what terms we use, but yeah, to separate what is empowerment, it's easier to, probably will be easier to argue that. But yeah, thank you very much for your presentations and inputs. It's just small. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanta, and I think it is very relevant what you shared with us out of the experience in Lithuanian left-wing party Kartu and from the Lithuanian feminists. I think when Gabriele earlier mentioned that one of the big tasks of left-wing parties would also be to develop a form of alternative progressive masculinity, my thought immediately was, well, this could be a task for the men in the parties. This could be, because why should women in left-wing parties develop alternative masculinities? They can only do it for themselves, as you can liberate only yourself, as we all know. So this would be my comment in this direction. And the safe space came also from Heidi as a big question. So I think this is obviously there is a discussion, a debate, and there are different possible strategies here. Gabriele, I think you can take the floor here.
Yes, I mean, I think what we can observe is really fundamental contradictions within the feminist movement, or should I say movements, because, I mean, on the one hand, there is this, women prefer to speak to women, we need safe spaces and so on. And on the other hand, there is this notion of gender, not nature, and so on. So it's somehow, I mean, it's difficult to solve these because these are contradictions, in my opinion. I mean, if it depends on what you think and not what, how your body is somehow signified, why exclude men from feminist circles? I mean, it's difficult to find arguments, in my opinion. That's the one point. The second point I wanted to make is referring to Yolanta's comment, because I just wanted to make clear, maybe I have not expressed it that clearly before, is that, empowerment is also related to sexual desire. And now it's not women want to be beautiful in order to please men, but to please themselves. And they want to be sexy or whatever in order to please themselves. It's all free choice. It's all voluntary. Prostitution, of course, is also voluntary. I mean, it's a very neoliberal way of looking at the world and defining it, which of course has also, I mean, this debate, prostitution versus sex work, and this extreme emotional hostility related to it is one sign of this neoliberalization of feminism, in my opinion. So I just wanted to state this. Thank you for... I'm not sure about what I'm talking about, actually, but that's my impression. I mean, maybe may I just add one more sentence, because my experience, my personal experience, is maybe quite different from Marga's. Because when I was 18, 19, I was working as an au pair in Madrid, in order to learn Spanish. And I got the impression at that time, and that was what I was told by all people surrounding me there, that Spain is a much more conservative country than Austria was at that time. But things have changed fundamentally. And my personal experience is quite the opposite from what you tell us, because it's really a backlash I experience every day in my daily life compared to what it was like in the 80s or in the 90s. In particular, with regards to, history in general. I mean, not only gender relations, of course, but the relation to Russia, the war, all this post-war order of Europe, and so on. Yeah, which is always used in order to argue in favor of militarization.
So, like in the feminist movements, where there are different contradicting or at least different directions, it is the same, or I could observe also with the backlash. At the one hand, we can observe a more normalization of feminist practices like consent that Marga was telling us. On the other hand, we observe a backlash. So that means also in left-wing parties, for example, the normal implication of intersectionality of gender, race, and class, it begins to it is not so self-evident anymore as a strategy. So what we could observe also is that with observing the neoliberalization of feminism and the neoliberal incorporation, there is this trend, we go back to look only at the class dimension. So, but this now brings again another point to the discussion, and I don't know if we would have time also for this, but the backlash exists at the same time as progress exists, I think is somehow to observe. And at the same time, as Andrea also mentioned, there are different directions of feminism existing in parallel. I have no question now, or no request for the floor, no question in the chat. Does anybody want to take the floor still, or otherwise I would give back to Marga and yes, Heidi, please.
Yes, perhaps I can underline what do you said, Babs, because if we now discuss papers for our party congress in October, you cannot find the word women, but class. And the people in my board in the Communist Party told me, yes, but it includes the women, because the class is women and migrants, most of them, as Marga said. Yes, but there is women and class is a structure category, and we need to speak about, and we need to analyze this specific in the class, and not delete the word to speak about women and race and so on. So this is the tendency. What I say is a rollback in our party in Austria.
Thanks, Heidi, for sharing this observation from the Austrian Communist Party. Now, could we maybe find the final words to close this webinar? Marga, Gabriele, who starts?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, conclusions. I mean, the neoliberalization of society is so deep and it's so, embodied in the younger generation. I mean, this simply, my students don't know a different world, simply. They are 20, 22, 25 maybe, and they know neoliberalism and nothing else. And I think this is important because this is a very, implicitly a very clear mode of fighting in a peaceful form. And militarization, which is, the key project of the European Union now, which will certainly further increase this push to the right, because it will lead to a deterioration of living conditions and cutback of social services and so on and so on. That's what I currently regard as the most dangerous development. And with regards to gender relations, as particularly dangerous because of what I have said during my, briefly, of course, very briefly, during my presentation. I think we have to fight this militarization and the gender roles, ideas that are related to it, even if they talk more and more about integrating women into the army. I mean, that's not what I expect feminism to be, integration and fighting in the army. Yeah, that's not what I regard as feminism, quite the opposite. And I think this is a core project, or should be a core project of the left, to fight militarism, to find these gender roles related to it, because they definitely mean subordination of women. I mean, the soldier is a male soldier, and violence is closely attached to this image. And I think this is the point. And yeah, and of course, this is not only a rational reaction to a socioeconomic situation, but it's an emotional reaction to this situation. Yeah. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Gabriele, for this comprehensive conclusion also. Thanks, Heidi, also, Heidi Meinzold, for remembering us on the positive security definition in the chat. And Marga, I would like to give the floor now to you for the final
Thank you very
conclusion.
much, comrades and friends. And it's so nice to have the space to talk among us and to go deep into some problems. So I would like to be very honest in my last remark as a personal view. I'm a Marxist, and I'm not humble to say that I think I understand capitalism better than people who don't use Marxist as a way of analysis. So when I found some men, comrades, in my political parties who deny the women's domination under capitalist conditions, I repeated, you don't understand how capitalism works. So it's a denial of the left history of analyzing the world. They are denying the working class history in denying the way capitalism uses sexual roles to dominate women. It's so obvious to me that this denial is closer to the reaction we talked before, of not wanting to see what is happening in society. So, Barbara, my proposal for you to talk with the comrades is that the best way to fail as a political party is this direction, not understanding the society you want to represent. And if they are not going to do that, others will do. Others will do, because the class always find a way to represent itself in one way or in another. And not understanding climate, racist and feminist perspective, absolutely integrated for new generation in the way capitalism is dominating and defining this through militarization as a consequence also of that, is simply not understanding the world, not wanting to understand the world. It's a political will of not understanding what's happening. So trying to show them with data what is happening in society, rather in inner political theories that, let me insist, I'm a Marxist, trying to understand the society is the perfect way of failing in representing the working class today. This is my debate with some comrades I have in Spain. I wish you the best also in Austria. One of the things I like to have a last remark about what happened in Germany, no? When the 2,000 new members joined the Linke, the majority of them very young people. And I know there will be problems now with the young generation. I mean, this confrontation of political theories, the experience that Gabriele talked before. The personal experience is very relevant also in how to see the world and things like that. But I think it's a hope also for the left to understand that incorporating naturally the perspective of particularly the young woman is the way of doing the things better. That is my perspective based on the analysis and on the data, on a Marxist perspective, at least I have. And thank you very much for this debate. Really, I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you very much, Marga. And I think Gabriele also has a reply still to you.
Yes, I just wanted to mention Nancy Fraser's Cannibal Capitalism as a basic introduction to all male comrades who don't understand, because it's easy to read and it really refers to all these topics you mentioned, and it's an important book in my opinion.
Many thanks, Gabriele, for the hint, and many thanks to all of our participants for joining today. Please stay tuned on our website, transform-network.net, for the upcoming webinar series. And please also note that there will be the 6th International Marxist Feminist Conference in Portugal, in Porto, 21 to 23 of November. Thanks very much, Gabriele and Marga, for speaking. Thanks, Anais, for the organization. And thanks to you all. And I wish you a good day still.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the pleasure to join you. Bye-bye.
Bye.